Hello and welcome to the third and final episode of Opposition View as I preview Ireland's Autumn Nation Series fixtures with expert guests from the opposing nations. This week, attention turns to the land down under, to Joe Schmidt and to Australia. And with me to discuss all things Wallabies is host of the 8-9 Combo podcast and friend of the show, Brett McKay. Brett, it is great to have you back on. I'm a bit uncomfortable playing number 8 this week, but I think I'll manage.
Look, I'm sure you're exactly the same dimension as Harry, mate. So I'm sure you'll do a bang up job. But thanks for having me back on. It's good to catch up again.
It's always good to have you on, and just to get that outside voice. I know people have responded well to these shows, so it's great. But unfortunately, the timeline for all of these has been starting at the 2023 World Cup and working forward. And I know it wasn't great for Australia, but we will start there. Like it was first time not making it out of the group. Eddie Jones promised they weren't going for the croissants. They did kind of just go for the croissants. It was a bit of turmoil. Looking back now, what's the kind of mood, not just of yourself, but in the nation of that World Cup?
Look at in terms of the World Cup, it's long forgotten, and we'll get over it one day. But it's just it's the result we'd all prefer just to assume never happened if we're honest. And you're right. They were promised that we weren't going for just the croissants, but we were promised that he wasn't going to Japan too. And look how both of those things ended out. And just the way it, the way the Eddie Jones tenure started to the way it ended was just black and white, poles apart. It's dawned on me the irony of me wearing a Sunwolves t-shirt as I as I speak to you, of course, as well. Yeah, look, it didn't end great, but if going through a year of Eddie Jones has meant that we get Joe Schmidt on board for even if and through the Lion series at this stage, then where the Wallabies are now to where they were this time last year is a similar polar distance away. So that's certainly been the recovery has been really, really good to see, and it's been really good to see, mate, because so many of the players that have done well and have shone in 2024 are the guys that Eddie Jones just did not rate at all last year. And here we are.
It's I'm not going to compare it at all to when Joe Schmidt took the Ireland job, but that particular point is very true. When Joe Schmidt took the job that time, certain players stepped up that were never really considered by other coaches, like Dave Carney, Andrew Trimble, Chris Henry, and they had unbelievable, that first stint of the Joe Schmidt era, that kind of first couple of years before he brought in new players. And I think that's something that Joe is very good at as well, is he knows what he wants. And like I did say, I didn't know when we get into it, but we might as well get into it now. Joe Schmidt
Yeah.
is a fantastic coach. He knows what he wants. And like, yes, there's going to be some teething problems because of, rugby championship and whatever. But there is definitely a sense now of, yeah, things are going in the right direction.
Yeah, there is, mate, and Schmidt from the moment he took over to the moment of his first test against Wales back in July to all through the Rugby Championship and then now through these November tests as well. He's always spoken about incremental improvements. I'm sure he was saying the same thing in his first few years in Ireland as well. And that's the kind of guy he is. It's the kind of coach he is. Explains things so well. Whereas again, not this time, but through the journey of last year, as Wallaby supporters and Australian rugby supporters, we couldn't really it was harder to climb aboard the journey because he didn't actually know what the journey was. The destination was changing from one week to the next, and the game plan was changing from from blocks of 2 games, it seemed. Whereas now, didn't necessarily happen through the rugby championship. One bit would get better, and then it would be a different bit, and then it would be a different bit, and they wouldn't actually stack on top of each other. These November tests, though, it looks like it has, and now all of a sudden there's a very very Irish feel, dare I say it, to the attacking pattern. They're very deliberately holding possession, bending gain line, making good ground, and they're marching up the field at points. And then they're finding the width, and they're finding that second and third pass to unlock the outer channels, which that in itself isn't necessarily a Schmidt thing, but they've quickly identified that that's the way to get past the and to break the blitz defense. And it's been really good to see the issues that caused the Wallabies problems through the rugby championship. they've now got ways to counter them and to fight them. And again, that's been really, really good to see.
And just kind of on that, like it is funny. I think one of the things that would have been a stick to beat Joe Schmidt with was, it's actually hard to say when I say it, but to beat him with is probably not getting the most out of, say, athletes, the Simon Sebos, the Craig Gilroys, the guys like
Mm.
that. Whereas I think now, and even when he was with New Zealand and what he did for like Will Jordan and Mark Chile's from last year, he's kind of shaped just enough that the Jordans, the Chileas, the Swahili's, the Ikitaus have just come alive. And I think it's
Yeah,
testament to his evolution as kind of a coach, because attacking side of the game, that's his bread and butter as well. Yes, it's the breakdown, but it's the attacking side and getting a flow and knowing opposition weakness. And I think the fact that he knows how to capitalize on a weakness is the one thing that scares Irish fans this week, if they are going to be scared, because that he's the worst man to face if you've got any glaring holes.
it's been really interesting this week, and we've spoken to Pat McCarry on our pod this week, and speaking to him, he said much the same thing. And I very deliberately put the question to him. What of the Wallabies' improvement, is most feared, to use that word in Ireland. And he almost laughed and said Schmidt, because like you say, if anyone knows potentially how to unpack Ireland, it's going to be Joe. And we'll find out for sure this weekend, won't we?
We'll get into it a little bit later on as well, but just kind of on 2024, Joe gets the job. Yes, there's always that bit of chatter of, he's a Kiwi coach, he's whatever. Kind of got a fortunate start because his first three games were against Wales. The first two games was against Wales in the summer.
Mm.
And at the time, where do you think, like, was there a sign of clear progress at that stage, or how was it? Because I'm conscious a lot of
Um,
people listening here wouldn't have watched those games.
yeah. It was a funny sort of feeling, mate, because they those two tests against Wales, particularly, I think the scoreboard probably didn't tell the full story about how, I think, well in hand Australia had those two games. The second test, Wales came back and they certainly found some gains through their line-out drive, Wales, but again, particularly in that second game. But I never felt that the Wallabies were going to lose those two games. But those two games, and even the third one against Georgia, it was still very much a case of he was just going, I need to look at as many players as I can. He said it a few times that he was meeting a lot of those guys for the first time. He coached against a lot of them, but he'd never met many of them at all. He's got a whole new coaching staff. Obviously he's got a bit of background with Mike Cron. He knew Laurie Fisher, but he'd never worked with him. Owen Toole, and he obviously had worked with. But his background style, his team manager, his physios, his S&C trainers, they're all Australian guys he's never worked with. So he said through that July series that suddenly we had 50 or 60 people coming together, and we all sort of knew each other in patches and all that, but this was the first chance for everyone to come together. And so to come through that July series with 3 wins was a really good result, considering they came together 10 days before the first test, effectively. The Rugby Championship, you could see, all right, this is how the Joe Schmidt Wallabies are going to try and play. And I guess the downfall of that is that we're having to see that game plan against South Africa and New Zealand, particularly. And Argentina and Australia have matched up pretty well the last few years. So that was always going to be tough. But South Africa and New Zealand up front is a pretty tough assignment. So it was probably always going to be a case of, let's see the incremental improvements. And then, by the time we go north in November, then what's it look like? And the cherry on top was the England win, no doubt about that. And even the jump from where they were after the second Bledisloe test against New Zealand to that win over England, there was 6 weeks in between. They had a couple of sort of pre-squad camps, and the camp came together maybe 10 days before they left. So they did a fair body of work before they headed north, and you could see what they'd done, because suddenly they were unlocking England in ways that I think a lot of Wallabies fans didn't expect that would be possible.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because it probably follows a similar timeline to what Joe used to do with Ireland, where he'd have the November tests. He might go and maybe hand out a few new caps. And there's been a big discussion about Andy Farrell this week, but we're here to talk about Australia. But he'd hand out a few new caps, and then at Christmas time, he'd go and he'd assemble maybe 50, 55 man squad, bring them in, run everyone through what he's expecting before the Six Nations, and then come January again, he'd whittle it down. And it is a little bit longer of a time frame, but
Yeah.
it is similar, and probably a similar approach to what he would have used before. And again, that's where you kind of see someone like Joe come to the fore, gets a few weeks, gets a bit of analysis done, has a look at everyone. I think he's up there along with, say, Razi and Jacques as probably the best coaches at looking at everyone available. He's not very closed off in that regard. Everyone will get their chance. And like again, I am conscious of people may not have seen the rugby championship. Like you could look at it and say it was one win from six, but at the same time, and I know the Australia game was, or the Argentina game was the one that was really headline grabbing. But in terms of making improvements, and by the time the Bledisloe test comes around, there was probably some sense of improvement, probably with the
Yeah.
exception of that Argentina game.
Yeah, there definitely was. And that Argentina game, the second one that they lost and lost, pretty comfortably, pretty heavily. At the time, I thought, oh, this is bad. You're like they can't even now back up a win, and when that's long been a bit of a Wallabies thing. But how did they go from being so dominant in defence, so dominant at the breakdown? Set piece was pretty good that first week to not even a week later. It's just fallen apart. That was real alarm bells. But again, 2 weeks later, they come back to the first Bledisloe in Sydney, and it was a different team. And again, it was really the last 10 minutes before New Zealand got away. So all of a sudden, we've gone 70 minutes into a Bledisloe, and we're to some degree maybe unlucky to have lost it. Now, New Zealand were always going to find a way, I think, but there was, and maybe that was the game that that got Wallabies fans and Australian rugby fans fully aboard the Joe Schmidt train, because suddenly they've gone from record loss in Argentina to very nearly winning in Sydney, and I was like, wow, how's he done that in less than 2 weeks, because there's travel period in there as well. So that was a real turning point, I think, and I think a lot of the guys got a lot of confidence out of that. Go to Wellington the following week, and probably wasn't as good a performance, but still, still plenty to gain from it. And then it's to say it's all clicked as I've headed north for the northern autumn, our spring.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of a funny one in that regard then, because like the squad that Joe had for the rugby championship was kind of mixed and matched, and there was almost a sense of, well, surely he's going to refine and pick a set team when he comes into the autumn. Kind of hasn't done that again. He's keeping an eye on players. He knows that he doesn't have a lot of opportunities for the Lions tour, and he's probably working from that base point that, like, I can get the lads ready in May, June, July next year, but I need to see them first. And in
Yeah,
terms of the guys he's bringing in, because Swiley is the one that everyone's going to talk about, but he's not the only one. He has tested that squad, hasn't he?
yeah, he has, and I've actually written about this for Rugby Pass this week, that he's used 47 players this year, and if there's talk of Tane Edmund perhaps getting a debut off the bench this year, so he'd be 48. 19 debutants if he's it. But within that 47, 48 players, there's a core group of 12 guys I identified who have all played at least 7, and most of them have played 10, 11, 12, or 12 tests. A few of them have played all 12 games this year. And that's a really interesting thing to do, because he's looked at a lot of players, obviously, but at the same time, he's sort of been building this core, and it's Angus Bell, it's Matt Fetzler, it's Nick Frost and Jeremy Williams, lock, it's Valentini, McWright, Wilson in the back row. Jake Gordon's come very much back into the frame this year at scrum half. Noel Olaseo's had his best year as a Wallaby at 10. Iki Tau at 13, Kellaway and Wright have been fantastic across the back. So those 12 guys suddenly have played a lot of rugby together this year. Add in Lukan Salakaia-Loto, who's played probably half of his 10 games off the bench. Tate McDermott's played all but one of his games off the bench. Alan Alaalatoa's about half and half as well. So that's 15 out of 47, 48 guys who, as I say, have played a lot of rugby together this year. They've been through a lot together. They've won games, they've lost games, they've had success, they've had really, really bad losses. But that's a really impressive, exciting core, I think, building forward. And then you add in Joseph Suaalii, who, you know, by the Lions series next year, he'll have had a full season of Super Rugby under his belt. You know, we're still not 100% sure where, you know, Will Skelton might be for the Lions next year. He's had a look at Samu Karevi. I'm not so sure about him going forward, but you can see the building blocks falling into place. And again, that's been a really nice thing to see. And it wasn't actually until I've had a lot of this information. I've been tracking it all year, but it wasn't until this week where I actually started looking at it a bit closer that I realised that there is actually a lot of guys who've played a lot of rugby together this year, which has got to help in the future for sure.
Yeah, no, it does, especially because it's hard. You can't compare it to say Ireland, where we're saying, right, well, Andrew Porter, Caelan Doris have started every test, and you know, because it's a little bit different for us. We're a very established team. Those lads have 4 or 5, in Porter's case, 6 years of international experience. It's not the same. But for Joe Schmidt to come in there and do that it's a very good blend of, right, you're my core guys, you're establishing them as leaders, as important players, you're giving that boost, but you're also saying we are going to chop and change, we are going to see what's out there. And like 19 debuts
Yeah,
is truly phenomenal, like in any given year,
yeah,
like especially when there's only really one test against a proper tier 2 nation, if I'm right.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's Georgia, effectively. Yeah, but again, I made the point in the column that all the guys that he's given debuts to this year have kind of been deserving. They've all they've been worth looking at. And furthermore, he's the debuts are spread across the park. So there's a couple of props. There's a hooker in there. There's a couple of locks. There's a couple of back rowers. There's a couple of midfielders. A couple of back three players. Like they look very deliberate in the way he's cast the net. And so that again, that's him going, all right, let's see what's out there in Australian rugby, and we'll see what we can unearth. And he's unearthed some. There's only a handful of guys that only played that one test, so a lot of them have played a couple. And someone like Jeremy Williams, who was nowhere near a World Cup squad last year, even at the start of Super Rugby this year, I don't think if you had have said then in February, March that by the end of the year he'll have played 10 or 11 tests, you'd have been laughed at. But he's been fantastic and has not looked out of place, which has been, one of the best things.
and that's a very smart way of doing it, a very shrewd way of doing it by Joe. But like, unfortunately, as much as I did take in all that, I just heard Angus Bell has played almost every game, and as an Irish fan, as a Munster fan, and then also knowing a lot of Ulster fans, and we have prop issues at the moment, I'm like, any chance someone can just not kidnap him, but just point him in the direction of a province while he's in Dublin and ask
Well,
him.
look, it's been interesting, mate, because he's had probably 18 months of interrupted injury runs, and so and even didn't play a lot of Super Rugby this year. He came into the Rugby Championship essentially with not a lot of rugby under his belt, but certainly by the Bledisloe tests, he was amongst Australia's best, and you could see he was getting better every week. And like his ball carrying has been phenomenal. Rob Valentini is just, he's never mind one of the best in Australia. He is one of the best back rowers in the world now. There's no question about that. Len Ikitau was always, I think back 2 years, end of 2022, and Dave Rennie was a big Len Ikitau fan, and it still astounds, I think, everyone in Australian rugby that he didn't go to the World Cup. So we knew what Len Ikitau was capable of, but I think it was just a case of he's a coach that's backed him to play within the pattern and to be the guy that can unleash those outside backs. And he's done it because he's been able to do that for years. He's been doing that with the Brumbies for years. So it's been really, really good to see. And look, Bell is a phenomenal player. He's just had such a good, strong year, and he's a classic example of that. Like, suddenly he's played 30 odd tests, and he's just sort of coming into. I think he's 27 or so he's really coming into the prime of his life. So if he can stay fit for the next couple of years, the Wallabies are a very different prospect heading into 2027 particularly.
Absolutely. And that's where the kind of autumn has really, there was a sense of somewhat of excitement and somewhat, maybe biting your tongue when you get excited. But now in the autumn, it has proper taken off. There's that big win over Wales, the absolute juggernaut of a game against England. And I know the Scotland game didn't go accordingly, but just that sense of, right, we are a force to be reckoned with again. Maybe not at the very top table of South Africa, Ireland, France, New Zealand, but the Lions can't come down here and expect 3-0 and to win every single game anymore. And I think it's for the betterment of rugby and for the betterment of the Lions, if you're a Lions fan, that's not the case. The starting on those games, we start with the England game just because it's the most amount of fun. I feel like that was quite a scalp for Australia. But again, that must have been a massive amount of belief that went into that team after that result.
Oh, it was absolutely, and you could see that they got to Cardiff and they played like a team that had a fantastic week together, because they would have been training with the sort of confidence that they probably hadn't trained together with, maybe ever as a playing group. So they would have bounced from London to Cardiff, across the motorway. I'm quite sure. There was Harry and I had a sort of a November series preview pod leading in. We're trying to work out what was going to be an A, what was going to be a C, what was going to be an F for the four CNR teams anyway, and we had different views on what was going to be a pass mark for what was going to be an A for Australia. And he was sort of saying, if Australia can get 2 wins out of 4, they'd be pretty happy with that. They'd have to call that a success. And I sort of said, well, I think they need to be saying that 3 wins is the A. And he sort of said, well, yeah, that maybe it's true, but I don't know where they get 3 wins. I said, no, but it needs to be hard to get. And so, England was always going to be Scotland was always going to be the benchmark game, but England was going to be the one that, if they could win that, then holy moly, it's just a different feeling about the whole tour. And that will be the case regardless of the result this weekend. So the game itself was an absolute emotional roller coaster, though, mate, because, they got out of the blocks so well, led well at halftime, and leading at halftime has been such an important thing for the Wallabies going back 4 or 5 years now. There's the absolute majority games that they have won, they have led at halftime. So it's always been a case, if they can get ahead at halftime, they sort of know how to go on with it. And they're leading England at halftime, not just by a little bit, but by good margin. Then England were always going to come back. They did. Wallabies kicked on, scored again, got themselves into a potentially winning situation. England come back, and all of a sudden that's that, oh, God, here we go again. They've got themselves, they've done all the hard work. They're not able to finish it. And then to score the winning try that they did, like the way they did it as well, like it wasn't just a set piece line out drive. It wasn't a kick a penalty from in front. It was they held it for 7 or 8 phases and then flung it wide and found a gap and went and finished it off. And that's just something we haven't seen in the Wallabies for I don't know how long.
There's something beautifully Joe Schmidt about it. Not because Joe Schmidt has expansive rugby, but because do the basics, the catch pass.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing extravagant about it. It was just a very well worked score where fatigue didn't even look to be a factor.
No, it wasn't. And if you look back at it, the key, there was 3 little touch passes, which Wallabies teams as a pass probably would have tried to cover that same territory with 1 long pass, but it went Panger and Moser, I think, to Donaldson, to McWright, to Ikitau really quick, bang, 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 and the 3 of them going that quick all drew defenders, and by the time Ikitau had it, he had enough time to square up and aim fair between Marcus Smith on the outside and might have been Ollie Lawrence. I'll stand corrected there. But just the fact that he was able to square up and get Marcus Smith's attention, and I've seen him say subsequently that he always knew that if he could get square on it, he could get the left hand away, being a left-handed guy, and he did, and he executed it, and Max Jorgensen finished it off. And the funny thing about it was, and I'm sure it was different for you guys, but in Australia we had Stan Sport covering it, but they're doing it remotely, obviously. And so they are looking at the same feed we are as fans. And so Sean Maloney, the head commentator, you can hear him seeing it play out, if you like. So he starts that little passage thinking there's got to be covering defenders, surely. And then he suddenly realizes that, oh my God, there's not. And it's just going to be one of the great highlights of 2024 without any doubt at all.
Absolutely. And like I didn't see the game live. I just seen, oh my God, they've won it, like flashing into group chats left, right, and center. And being like, how in the name? Because I checked this game like 5 times and there was multiple lead changes in the last like 15 minutes. I'm like, how in the name? But that sense of getting over the line. And I think what's really, look, I made a point on a podcast recently and I said, one of the most fascinating things about Ireland at the moment is they're finally interesting again, because there's doubters and there's praise and there's squad selection discussion and everything. And they're not running over teams like they were. Like, it's proper
Yeah.
interesting. But now it's like, oh, because Australia lost to Scotland and Ireland beat Fiji so comprehensively, it's taken a little bit of the sting out of the week, unfortunately. And that Scotland game, Australia just never got going. Yes, Scotland are a good
No.
team. They can beat anyone on their day, is true, regardless of what you think about them outside of that. But just for Australia to not get going, it has taken a little bit out of this week, unfortunately.
Yeah, and from our point of view, it's probably been a good thing, because it's been, all right, this is now the chance to reset, get ready for Ireland. And the Ireland test was, of the four, it was like, oh, why we have to play Ireland last? Because by that point they'll be warmed up as well. And the thinking being that, if they're getting to Ireland with only one, or maybe, and we will only be 2 wins, but if they were getting to Ireland with only 1 win, what sort of frame of mind are going to be there? I'm confident that what the Wallabies arrived in Dublin this week saying we can still finish this tour on a high, and they should be thinking that, because they probably can. There's probably been no better opportunity to try and knock Ireland off in Dublin in the last couple of years for Australia than what they've got now. So, look, Scotland were fantastic last week. There's on Sunday. There's no question about their defence, particularly their midfield defence. Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones were just fantastic. The breakdown was chaos at times, and and then, like, is that little, and I've just pulled the notebook out just to refresh my memory with the scores and things, but like the turning point is that Tate McDermott cross kick, unfortunately, and it's going to be remembered as the Tate McDermott cross kick. Unfortunately, it's certainly not all his undoing, but like that's a 70-meter turnover. That had they have scored that, even if they don't convert the try, it's 17-11, 17-13 potentially. But what happened from there is that Scotland went and scored twice, and they didn't convert them, but it's still 10 points. So it's a 17-point turnaround effectively. And that was the game. As I say, 17-11, 17-13, instead it's 27-6. And, it doesn't take much for games to get away, unfortunately. So looking forward to this weekend, no question, as has always been the case and with the Wallabies, and it certainly has been the case this year. It's all going to come down to where they are after the first 20 minutes.
And I think that's an interesting one as well, because Ireland's first 20 minutes against New Zealand just wasn't where it should
Weren't
be.
great at all, were they?
They
No.
weren't great. Like Fiji, okay, fair enough. That one was kind of over after half an hour. The Argentina game, Ireland got off to a fast start, but they finished so slowly, so poorly. They looked tired at the end. And I think you've got two teams here who will be dying to get off the blocks quickly and to get a little bit of a stranglehold on the game. But then there's just that backdrop of, have Ireland been great? Was it just that one performance against a poor Fiji side? Are Australia just the inverse of that, where they've had good performances bar one? And it is fascinating. And I know what I do stand by what I said, that like losing to Scotland and Ireland winning has changed the narrative around it. But it's still a fascinating contest in a lot of ways, because I don't think the margin between Ireland and Australia is as big as, I think the bookies have it at 15 points. I just don't see it being that
Yeah,
big.
right. Yeah, I didn't know that. I'm not entirely surprised, but yeah, that's it was always going to be a matter of how big a favourite Ireland would start, I suppose. So yeah, that's interesting in itself. It's the other thing that losing Scotland did is that obviously Grand Slam talk died very, very quickly, and they were doing their best to play Grand Slam talk down in Edinburgh last week, but unfortunately, with all the snow up there, they didn't get to train much, so talking was kind of all they could do. And I actually wonder whether all the Grand Slam talk might have, as much as they tried to play it down. I actually wonder whether the energy required to play it down might have been a bit of a factor, amongst other things. Now that's gone this year, this week, the expectation has probably lessened a little bit as well, and so that actually means I think it gives them back a bit of freedom that they can play with, and that they did play with in London, they did play with in Cardiff. They'll run out onto the Aviva this week, thinking, what have we got to lose? And that might just be enough to free them up. And from purely selfish point of view, that's what we're sweating on and hoping for.
Absolutely. And I hope it's a great contest, don't get me wrong, because I do think Ireland
Yes.
need to continue to be tested. I will be one of the stronger critics of Ireland's November out there so far. And I'm not, saying they're awful and pack it in, but I just think, Ireland's use of their squad, their youth, I think fundamentally, I think Ireland have started behind the eight ball in terms of blooding in new talent. And ultimately that makes it very, very difficult. Whereas Australia, yes, they're the under end of the spectrum in every way. They didn't get out of their group. They have a new coach. They blooded so much new talent. They had a poor rugby championship. But Australia, South Africa, France, New Zealand have all pushed on more than Ireland. And I think, look, the Ireland South Africa tour was very fun to watch. But
Absolutely.
in hindsight, if you told me we went to Japan, I'd have taken that as well. Do you know what I mean? So I'm kind of
Yeah.
I'm happy if we had done that as well. But it's really interesting now because Ireland will probably go with the tried and trusted. They'll look to make it 3 wins. Andy Farrell as well. And this is the other backdrop for all the talk about Joe Schmidt. Andy Farrell, if he does slip up here, if Ireland slip up, that feeds into Lions talk, feeds into Six Nations talk.
Absolutely.
I do feel he feels the pressure. It certainly looks like that for a man who never does. Like it's not arrogance to say he can't afford to lose this game because otherwise
No, I completely agree with you.
there'll be
I completely
droves
agree
of
with you.
media on top of him.
Yeah, and there's a couple of interesting little subplots here, and obviously Farrell against Schmidt is one of them. And they know each other very well. They've spent a lot of time together, spent a lot of time working on game plans together. So they'll know how each other thinks. That's from a coaching point of view. We probably haven't had a one-on-one matchup that is so evenly poised like we have with this game. But the other part of it is that they have lost to South Africa, they have lost to New Zealand, they very nearly lost to Argentina. Ireland cannot afford to lose to Australia because that just the whole the way it feels to us, like the North talks down on Southern Hemisphere rugby. Australia win this weekend, that argument is dead in the water. All the disparaging comments that are thrown towards Super Rugby means nothing anymore.
Yeah.
So it is going to be fascinating.
And I will hold my hand up. I'm very much in the opinion that Super Rugby is not where it was. And I think we discussed it when you were on before.
And we'll agree with that. But for
Yeah.
all this talk about Super Rugby doesn't develop any players, well, if it's developing players that can beat Ireland in Dublin.
Yeah. To be fair, as well, I also say that about the Premiership, and they will also say, "Well, we beat you," but I'll still say it about the Premiership. But look, Brett, it's been very good. But I will hold you to account and get a prediction off you for this one. Firstly, what you want to see from Australia, but also just predictions how it's going to go.
Look, I think what we'd want to see is that the lessons from Murrayfield have been heeded, and they have been applied on top of what they learnt and what they did well at Twickenham and in Cardiff as well. So again, it's that improvement coming from it, knowing what didn't work last week, what did work the 2 weeks before that. Can we bring it together in Dublin and put on a performance against a team that is going to be ferocious at the breakdown? They are going to defend with fast line speed and all that, but they now know that they can deal with that because they've had experience dealing with that. They have unlocked blitz defense on this tour. So they've even got a bit of recency about it. So that's what we want to see for sure. What we don't want to see is another repeat of Murrayfield, where they just can't get into the contest and then ultimately are put away. A tight score at halftime, an Australian lead would be ideal. Be the first scorers after halftime. That just puts them in such a good position. It puts any team in such a good position, but particularly Australia. Prediction: I only needed to win by one, mate. There's no bonus points in
I
the
love it.
in the November test, so I only needed to win by one. I don't care whether that one comes in the 60-second, 70-second, 80-second, 90-second minute, as long as it's there.
I would very rarely disagree with you on last minute winners, but I have to make my way after I finish writing about this game. I have to make my way to Thomond Park, not from Dublin, but from the house to Thomond. I don't want it to drag on. Have it done, and I could be writing up and done, and I could just head off to the other games I'm covering. But I just think the point there about get in front, stay in front is massive, because Ireland, that is what
Yeah.
Ireland do. When Ireland bring on the bench, it's 800 caps of experience with Conor Murray, Keane Healy, who'll probably break the record this weekend. Ian Henderson, Peter O'Mahony. If Ireland are trailing, we could see a situation like the New Zealand game, where you're asking Conor Murray and Sam Prendergast or Kieran Frawley, who do not have the experience at 10, to go and say, right, chase it. And
Go and
that's
win a
not a
game.
pack
Yeah.
designed to chase. It's going to be a lighter pack than what Australia bring off the bench, more than likely, unless we see some left field decision there and Ireland goes 6-2. So it's very much both teams. Whoever's in front of halftime, you could nearly put the house on them to win it, because
Yeah.
they are so good from from that front foot. Look, I think Ireland will win. I don't think it'll be comfortable. As someone who enjoys rugby as a spectacle, I wish Will Skelton was playing this one, because it would just add to the intrigue.
Yeah.
He's never lost to Leinster, for example, in club rugby, and he's played them 4 times. Like, that would be so intriguing. But he's obviously been hauled back by an Irish coach as well, doing us a favor. Like, why would you do that? But
It was funny. He said he said last week, leading into it, that he wasn't. He said, I actually don't know. I'm hoping that Rod might give me the week off. I reckon as soon as he said that, he's gone, no way in hell, mate.
yeah,
We need, and that's one of those things. Why couldn't we have played Wales for the fourth game? Why couldn't we have play Ireland second or third? It certainly would have been handy to have Skelton, because I think, funnily enough, last week in Edinburgh was probably his best game of the two. So just never have him long enough is the biggest issue, and it's for that reason that the doubt about his long-term viability as a Wallaby is going to remain, because unfortunately we just never have him for long enough to even get a sense of whether playing for Australia is something that he wants to do. It's easy to come in for 2 weeks and go, yeah, I want to be here, I want to play for Australia, but it's really over a rugby championship, dare I say it, or a full World Cup. He didn't get to play the full World Cup last year because of injury, that you actually get an idea of what drives someone. And unfortunately, with Will Skelton, we've been asking that question for 10 years.
unfortunately so. And if he was there, we'd be asking a different question, which would only add to proceedings. But Brett, my thanks for coming on my morning time, your evening time this week. For everyone at home, we will preview this final clash with Australia. We'll recap the final clash with Australia. Then we'll take a little break, because the Ireland games have been energy sapping both on and off the field. If you do like to see it here, please do subscribe. If you like Brett's contributions, you got the 8-9 combo. I will link it down below. If you want to tune into that, you'll have your your on the whistle stuff as well, which is always great fun. Always good to be first out there. Not everyone can be. Someone has to be first. It's usually you guys. But you'll find all those links down below. And until next time, thanks very much, Brett. Thanks very much to everyone. But until next time, take it easy.